Started. Hello, everyone. My name is Nate Casey, and I am the Chief Revenue Officer at Pearl. Thank you so much for your willingness to attend this webinar. Here's a quick overview, a little couple of things that we're going to go over today. From 12:05 to about 12:30, it'll be my presentation. I'll explain ARP ESSER, ARPesser, review how the funding flows, where you come into play, and how to determine your candidacy eligibility, as well as other useful tidbits along the way. From 12:30 to 12:55, many of you submitted great questions, and we hope that this presentation covers most of them. We'll address commonly asked questions and some really insightful questions as a group, and then if time allows, we can take more questions via the chat. So as questions pop into your head, please throw them into the chat. Also, so you know, we're recording this presentation and we'll be sending it out to all registrants alongside additional resources. Feel free to put your questions and comments again in the chat, and we'll do our best to address everything. When I first started to wrap my head around ARP ESSER funds, I quickly realized that although there are a lot of resources available via the federal government, news outlets, local agencies, and primers from for-profit vendors looking to serve grants and/or contracts, there was little in the way of resources available specifically for tutoring companies of both the for-profit and not-for-profit variety. There is a ton of complexity in the way federal funds flow through this process. And my hope is that today's webinar demystifies that process for you, and that you leave this webinar feeling empowered to either A, apply through the request for proposal process to help our country recover from significant learning loss, or B, begin to build up your knowledge and resources to apply for those same types of requests for proposals in the future. I want you to know that this is just the beginning. We plan to create more resources for you in the coming months and hope that you will continue on this journey of learning more and more about how our country will recover and how we as educators can play a part in that recovery. When I first joined Pearl, we were a tutoring company focused on serving cancer foundations. We built our platform to handle all of the administrative tasks, as well as a one-to-one virtual classroom with post-session reporting. We realized that education needed a truly all-in-one platform and decided to sell the platform we built for ourselves to the tutoring industry. And as such, we are now an education software company. Once COVID hit, our platform became much more relevant. You might be asking yourself how Pearl is relevant to ARP ESSER funds. With the release of these funds, we're serving now as a technical partner to education companies and initiatives as they launch, manage, and scale hybrid tutoring programs. Now, during this webinar, I'm going to use a lot of acronyms. It gets very acronymy. I would like to go through those really quickly so that there is no confusion. And my buddy Mike is going to throw these acronyms into the chat so that you can scroll back up and refer to them as needed. The first one is ARP, or ARPA, sometimes referred to as ARP or ARPA. This stands for American Rescue Plan or American Rescue Plan Act, respectfully. I'll usually just be calling it either ARP or ARP. The second one is ESSER, or ESSER, which stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief. The third one is SEA, or C, which stands for State Education Agency, most often the Department of Education. The fourth is LEA, which stands for Local Education Agency, most often a school district. Now, here are a couple more. RFQ, Request for Qualification, RFP, Request for Proposal, RFB, Request for Bid, and SOW, Scope of Work. I'll oftentimes remind you throughout the presentation what I'm talking about, just in case there's any confusion. What the heck just happened? As the reality of COVID hit, I, like many of you, spent many months splitting my time between Zoom calls and helping my child navigate his educational experience from home. My son, Liam, is in 5th grade and he's dyslexic. So all of the fun, multisensory tools that his teachers were using in person had to be picked up from the school or proxied online somehow. In a matter of weeks, over 125,000 schools across the United States shut their doors. Over 55 million children were left without access to in-person classroom instruction, counseling, school lunch, and so many other services. Let's not forget all the lost time with good friends, sports, music programs, and the many other enriching activities that schools provide. At one point in the pandemic, an Education Week Research Center survey reported that 37% of teachers said they had interacted with students at least once per day since their school was closed due to the coronavirus, while 16% said they had not interacted with their students at all. As a result, the federal government has released somewhere between $120 and $190 billion. Now, the reason there's a big gap there, and we're not sure exactly where we are between 120 and 190, is because we're still watching funds slosh into ESSER via the CARES Act, which was enacted during the Trump presidency. Needless to say, we are talking about a ton of money going into education. So, how does ARP ESSER, ARPesser connect to tutoring? The relevancy is clear, the response to learning loss. First of all, the Brookings Institute reported tutoring is remarkably effective at helping students learn, with over 80% of the 96 included studies reporting statistically significant effects. In the field of K-12 education research, where there is little agreement on what works, these findings are remarkable, not only for their magnitude, but also for their consistency. The evidence is clear that tutoring can reliably help students catch up. Our good friends at Brown University's Annenberg Institute reported in Ed Research, rigorous research provides strong evidence that high dosage tutoring can produce large learning gains for a wide range of students, including those who have fallen behind academically. The ARP ESSER was enacted in March of 2021 and allocated $122 billion to states and school districts to safely reopen and sustain the safe operation of schools and address the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the nation's students. The ARP Act also includes $3 billion for special education, $850 million for outlying areas, $2.75 billion to support non-public schools. This is EANS, emergency assistance to non-public schools, private schools basically, and additional funding for homeless children and youth, tribal educational agencies, Native Hawaiians, and Alaskan Natives. Here's a quick overview of how the funding is breaking down. As you can see, there is a huge piece of the pie that is, let's call it other. As you might imagine, this funding is focused on getting kids back to school. The ARP ESSER funds are not just being used in place because of COVID, they are also addressing generations of education inequality, HVAC systems, new school buildings, busing enhancements, and on and on. All that being said, there is still a significant amount of money going towards learning loss. 20% of the funding that the local education agency, the districts, receive is mandated to be used to address learning loss. There are multiple strategies being contemplated and explored, including summer programs, after-school programs, and most important to this webinar, tutoring programs specifically. I have seen numbers as high as $30 billion used as a calculation of how much will be spent from the ARP for tutoring across the country. The approaches used to support these programs must be evidence-based. And again, this is mandated by the ARP. The interventions should respond to students' social, emotional, and academic needs and address the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on underrepresented student subgroups. Now, I'm sure I've been getting emails like crazy over the past week. We have a ton of different folks joining us today from dozens of states representing a lot of different types of companies. We have freelance educators, representatives from school districts, tutoring company owners, researchers, and state agencies. Everyone wants to understand this black box. If you're looking to apply for a grant or contract, or in the process of applying, or just thinking about the future and want to learn more, I want you to know this is a place for you. In regards to positioning, if you meet the following 3 criteria, you're already in a good place to get rolling. Do you have over 25 tutors on your roster? Are you leveraging trusted, evidence-based processes for training tutors, maintaining quality, and reporting? And do you have experience with government funding or a strong interest in learning the ropes? Now, if you don't meet these 3 criteria, that's okay. There is time. You can learn this stuff and you can get yourself ready. To start off, here's how the funding flows. The funding flows from the federal government to the state education agency. The state education agency then allocates the funds to their LEAs, or school districts. Then the LEAs, school districts, use those funds to hire a vendor or a subrecipient. That vendor or subrecipient, that's you. Okay, now stay with me. Now that the LEAs have their funding, here is where most of you come into play. The LEA will put out one of 3 types of requests: a request for qualification, RFQ, a request for proposal, RFP, or a request for bid, RFB. This is the green light to you that the LEA is buying or looking to secure a service. In that RFQ, RFP, RFB process, they will lay out a scope of work, which is basically a story rubric that will be used to rank the qualifications of any firm or any company or any organization that applies. The 3 criteria are team qualifications. How strong is your team? The quality of approach to serve the LEA. How closely is your approach aligned with the research? And of course, most importantly, how much are you going to charge the LEA? Naturally, you'll want to understand what you should bid for in any specific opportunity. Sometimes LEAs will give a budget directly in the RFP, but if not, you can usually access an annual public budget, or you can access the public board minutes that may have a discussion of how they will pay for the specific program. That will include possibly a total budget line for that specific program. Keep in mind, many LEAs will go with a scope of work at what's called firm fixed price, which means you look at the scope of work and say, you know what, I can do this for that set price. There's another term, which is time and materials. Time and materials can be used, but there are many more hoops to run through. Time and materials is basically you giving them an hourly rate. This doesn't happen as much as firm fixed price. And once you give them an hour rate, and then they pay you per hour in addition to paying you for any materials created or purchased. Now, you may ask yourself, what is the difference between a subrecipient and a vendor? And which one am I? The main difference between a subrecipient and a vendor in this context are the following. A subrecipient of grant funding has the autonomy to decide which students receive support. A vendor is assigned to students to support. A subrecipient applies to a grant, whereas a vendor bids or proposes to win a contract. This is a very important distinction. You are not locked in. This is important. You're not locked in as either a subrecipient or a vendor. It is okay for you to be a different designation from contract arrangement to contract arrangement. So you might have a contract as a vendor for one specific LEA or district, and you might be a subrecipient for another one. It just all depends on the nature of what they need. To dive deeper on what makes a subrecipient, unlike a vendor, here are the 5 main qualifications for a subrecipient. A subrecipient determines who is eligible to receive what federal assistance, has its performance measured in relation to whether objectives of a federal program were met, has responsibility for programmatic decision-making, is responsible for adherence to applicable federal program requirements specified in the federal award, and in accordance with its agreement, it uses the federal funds to carry out a program for a public purpose specified in authorizing statute, as opposed to providing goods or services for the benefit of the pass-through entity. Now, I know that sounds like a lot of government language, so we'll make sure that these notes are available to everyone so you can break that down. In regards to audits, though, it used to be that all federal agencies would have to do audits. Now we have specialized and standardized grant guidelines. There is language in the Uniform Grant Guidance, publicly available, and will be linked when we publish our notes, that outlines the 5 characteristics of a subrecipient as I defined. Bottom line is that there are less regulations as a vendor, but either way, if you receive over $750,000 in fees, you're subject to audit. Okay, time to take a deep breath. This is a lot, I understand. And we want to start to look at how you can participate now. Over 2/3 of the states plan to implement tutoring programs, and more states are announcing tutoring as part of how they're going to make their comeback. For those of you who are looking to participate, don't spin your wheels trying to submit to every RFP. It'll be crazy making. Ask yourself these questions. Do you know the school district or a particular school well? Have you done business with a district or school in the past? Do you have relative experience working for a district or on a school contract? And have you worked with a school district on preparing an RFP? These are really great things. If you got some of these boxes checked, you're probably in a good place to start to target who you want to propose. Have you consulted a school district on the RFP process? This is another one to make sure that you're clear about. Depending on how far along you are, there are 2 directions you can head to get access to the opportunities. This is probably the reason most of you guys came to this particular presentation. So, and again, we'll make all of this available to you. The most granular way to identify the district you want to help or most familiar with, you register as a vendor with that LEA, and when they post an RFP that matches your profile, you should be notified. The other way is to speak to the school that you have a strong connection with to better understand the discussions they're having with the district about learning loss programs. In this case, the school may refer you as a potential vendor to the district. If you meet the qualifications for readiness, as I defined earlier, or you're already a sizable tutoring company or organization and you have a lot of resources, the LEAs leverage several services to manage their RFP and or the procurement processes, so you can register with one of those databases. Oftentimes there's a cost associated with that, but the access to RFPs that you can get is pretty robust. You can leverage a site like GovWin, set up a profile, and receive RFPs relative to your profile. Periscope is often used by LEAs to manage procurement. So Periscope has a tool that allows you to build filters and receive relative RFP notifications, sometimes in advance. And then there's public purchase, which can also give you access to a large database of government contracts. Keep in mind that we are going through a massive national labor shortage. Competition for talent is fierce. I know a lot of teachers and they are exhausted and overwhelmed. And this idea that we're going to be able to lean on our certified teachers who are already spending a ton of time in the schools to be our tutors is a fallacy. It's just not going to happen. Some of them will step up to the plate. Some of them want the extra money, but we're going to have to supplement. To give you some examples, New Mexico is recruiting 500 educator fellows to work alongside teachers and provide small group tutoring. Arkansas wants to recruit 500 math and reading tutors for its core by June, with half ready to go by December. Chicago is recruiting 850 math and reading tutors over the next 2 years with the goal of having 650 in place this school year. And Denver is leveraging a private philanthropy to hire 500 reading and math tutors to work in the city and nearby suburban schools, and has recruited 300 so far. States and LEAs are being aggressive, but will definitely need support in order to meet their objectives. Our last slide today focuses on the research-based approach we at Pearl believe in and plan to power through our evolving technology. Here are the insights from the top researchers as outlined in EdResearch's paper authored by our friends Susanna Loeb, Carly Robinson, Matthew Kraft, all at Brown's Annenberg Institute, along with Beth Schuler at the University of Virginia. The research shows 3 times a week or week-long intensive small groups work best. You should max out your group size at 4. Adequate training for tutoring specifically is critical. All grades have the potential for high impact, but the most amount of research is focused on early grades. Data-driven programs with consistent assessment perform better overall. A consistent tutor relationship in most cases proves out to be more effective. Thoughtful matching is critical. High quality structure and content that aligns with classroom objectives is most effective for empowering the tutoring relationship. Tutoring held during the day have proven to be more effective than after-school tutoring. In-person is more effective, but remote is reaching parity with advancements and behavior change. And low-performing students can benefit the most, but stigma or the sense that tutoring is punitive can lead to negative outcomes. Some evidence supports the benefits of making tutoring broadly available to all students. It is critical that you align yourself with the research. Again, because ARP mandates that the strategies used for learning loss are evidence-based. Before we move to questions, I want to thank you all for attending. These are extraordinary times. The tutoring industry is virtually exploding. What an incredible opportunity we have to change education through one-on-one and small group learning. It is easy to be intimidated by everything that goes into participating in government funding, but armed with the right information and the willingness to go step by step, everyone that wants to make a difference has the opportunity to do so. Thank you. So I want to turn it over now to Naraya, who's going to ask some very specific questions.
Thanks, Nate. So a lot of you guys submitted questions before joining here today in the registration form. So what we're going to be doing is addressing the most commonly asked questions. I think most of the questions that folks submitted, we did cover in the content. So hopefully you receive lots of helpful and useful information there. And as Nate mentioned, we'll be sending out resources to them. So it's not limited to just whatever you're able to take notes on today. All right, Nate, so the first question we have is, how can I get funding to expand and scale my business?
So there are a couple of different ways. Obviously, there are nonprofits that are out there that are funding. There is the opportunity to align with companies like Pearl, where we can kind of get you in the right direction in regards to RFPs. We can make you aware of the kinds of opportunities that are out there for funding. There's also SBA. So if you are building a program, particularly a for-profit program, there's the SBA. We have had a couple of really great examples of tutoring companies that have come on in their early stages, maybe even just 2 or 3 tutors, and have started using our technology and have leveraged our technology as a way to start to scale. Once you meet a critical mass, you then can start accessing these funds, and we want to be your shepherd in that process. So there's all kinds. It's a small business association is the SBA. Sorry, I know I'm using lots of acronyms today. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, I'm sure folks are writing down those acronyms furiously. Also, as a reminder, if you guys haven't been submitting any questions in the Q&A, you are welcome to submit any questions there. What we'll do is we'll go through the questions that we have, and then we'll open it up to questions that you submitted and address them as a group if time allows. So the next question we have here, Nate, is there any way to know who or how many others you're bidding against in an RFP from the ARP ESSER?
So sometimes you have to register your interest. So they require you to register your interest when they put the RFP out, which could give folks a count on how many people are submitting. Sometimes there's a pre-bid process, and often there's a public list of participants to the bidder conference. So they'll say, we're going to do a quick conference to see how much interest there is for this RFP. And that conference, which is normally a video conference these days, will be attended. And once it's attended, the attendance record and the people who attended will be publicly available. So you can get a sense. Now, not everybody will attend, so you may or may not know, but you can get a sense typically from public record.
So what's the typical turnaround time for being awarded an RFP?
So the cycle time can really vary from issuance to award, but it's usually sometime, I know this is kind of broad, but it's usually between 3 weeks and 3 months, depending on the scope. RFPs are usually open 2 weeks to a month. So they'll make the RFP public, and then, somewhere between 2 weeks and a month, they'll set a date for folks to have their proposals in. Sometimes there will be what's called a BAFO, which is a best and final offer process. So they may narrow it down and then go into a best and final offer process to see. So it's good to think about when you're making a proposal to build in a little cushion so that if you feel like you can go a little bit cheaper, that you build in that cushion so that if it goes off to that best and final offer process, that you can bring your price down to be competitive.
So the next question we have, it does seem connected to one of the questions that one of the participants here today submitted, which Miranda, you asked, what does the hourly pay typically look like for a contract like this? Our next question is, if awarded the RFP, are you paid up front in installments or upon fulfillment? So Nate, could you kind of address these two questions related to payment?
Yeah, so let me just talk specifically to Miranda's question first. Oftentimes, as I mentioned in the presentation, you'll have a firm and fixed price, which means that they will say, we want you to accomplish this thing, and we want you to accomplish it within this budget. So say, we want you to accomplish this thing for $190,000. Then you would actually say, okay, I can do this for $180,000. You're not going to get paid more than $180,000. That's how much they're paying for you to do what you're saying you're going to do. Very rare, it's much more rare, but in some cases, they'll allow you to do time and materials. And in that case, you're going to have to understand what's competitive. We've seen states like Oklahoma go as high as $50 an hour to pay their tutors. So you kind of have to understand what's going on in your state and or in your district to understand what is competitive and what's going to allow you to be in a good place to win the bid. In regards to the RFP, are you paid up front in installments or upon fulfillment? Most of the time, you actually in your proposal will set up the payment terms via the RFP. So the RFP will kind of define some of that, and you'll propose that you will meet those terms. Robust time reporting processes to show who did what to make sure you're in providing details for invoice are critical. And most of the time, government payments are net 30, which means that they are 30 days from the time that they are supposed to be due, they have to pay. In some cases, if it's a lot of money, you can actually charge interest if you're not paid on time. Most people don't do that, but it is legally available to you to do that.
So this next question, I think a lot of you guys are curious about because you're all in different places as far as applying to these fundings go. If I can't meet 100% of the RFP requirements, is it worth submitting and giving it a try anyway?
Yeah, the nature of, an RFP and how much there is like a hard no for certain things is sort of RFP to RFP. So there may be some stipulations in the RFP that says these are absolute requirements and these are things that we would like to have but are not necessary. There's also situations where, an organization, a district will put out an RFP with a bunch of wish list stuff in there. And the proposals they receive, some will not completely fulfill all of the requirements of the RFP. The LEA, the district, can make a decision to say, you know what, none of the proposals we received are 100% comprehensive based on what we need. But there are 2 or 3 that have come close enough that we believe we can work with one of them and get as far down the road as we possibly can.
So now we can actually switch to questions that you guys have submitted. So we're going to move into addressing other questions that folks have put in the Q&A as well as chat. So a couple questions related to competitiveness and tips. So Malai asked for what's the best place to look for rates in my area so that I'm competitive. And then Miranda, again, you asked any tips for smaller tutoring firms with fewer than 25 employees. So in general, as far as tips go for those 2 things, what would you advise folks here?
So in regards to looking for rates that are competitive, it just depends on where you are socioeconomically in the geography of our country, right? So if you're in, Manhattan, the rates may be much higher that you could write in your proposal. As a for-profit company, we have tutoring companies all over the country. We see as high as $120 to $150 an hour charged for tutoring. And then we see nonprofits that are, doing tutoring for free or tutoring for $10 or $15. You also have some peer-to-peer situations. It also has a lot to do with the nature of your instructors, right? If you have a bunch of PhDs and master's degrees, floating around in your tutoring roster, and these are really strong, sometimes certified teachers in those districts, the amount that you can charge is going to be much higher, but it's still got to be relative to your geographic, socioeconomic context. And then there's also this idea that we've got a lot of states that are subsidizing the fact that there's such a resource problem from state to state. So Oklahoma, for instance, who I mentioned, where their tutoring program is going to be paying somewhere in that range of about $50 per tutoring session, they're having to be competitive because they're having such a resource problem in that state that, you can go to work at McDonald's in the state of Oklahoma and get paid $20 an hour right now. So, the competition is just so high for just resources that they're having to make it really, really palatable to folks who want to teach. Can you remind me of the other question, Naraya?
Yeah, the other question was just tips for smaller tutoring firms with less than 25 employees.
It's just such a great opportunity. I mean, you may or may not be in a place right now where you're absolutely going to be the go-to choice for the local agencies, the districts, as they're looking for supplement, but it really varies. There may be that, depending on what you teach, that there may be an opportunity, for instance, to focus in on special education, to focus in on literacy. So if you have some really strong instructors and you're under 25, I would get more specific. I would really look for requests for proposals that are more specifically ones that you could knock it out of the park on in regards to your focus as an educator. The other part to this, and I mentioned this in my presentation, is that there's always going to be an opportunity as well to grow. So, the money is going to be spent up until about September 2024. if that money is allocated, if there's a contract of exchange of money in place, September of 2024, that money can then be spent up until September of 2026. And what we're going to see is we're going to see big philanthropies come in and look at the most successful programs, and they'll start doing what's called braided funding. They'll start bringing in private philanthropy to start trying to make these programs sustainable infinitum into the future. So I hope that that helps.
So Aiden asked, this is kind of moving into talking about the technical piece of this. Are there specific online platforms mandated for the ARP tutoring?
Oh, that's a great question. So there are not. They are obviously, as I mentioned before, wanting everything to be evidence-based, but this is so much about being able to do great reporting. And when I talk about great reporting, and this is one of the reasons I think our company is in a great position, we're really focused on not just collecting all of the data to be able to feed that data and show the impact. We're also working with our partners to think a lot about the integrity of the data. So as you're collecting this data and as you're saying, this is how we can empirically show that our program is actually working. The idea is that you want to have a technical partner in that process so that in an automated way, you're collecting that data. There are a couple of companies out there, I'll refrain from mentioning them, but there are a couple of content companies out there. We're in some discussions with a few of them that are already just really well positioned as curriculum partners, as asynchronous content that already kind of meets the criteria that this evidence-based approach is looking for. So, if you are an engineer or you're building technology to kind of help power some of this, those were that pitches and what they called in the gold rush, the pitchforks and the knives and the tools that are being used. If you're one of those types of vendors, just making sure that you're focused in on the research, the data collection, and that you're doing everything to kind of make it easy for the educators to collect that data. But to answer the question directly again, there are no specific technologies that ARPA speaks to that you exactly have to use.
So another question related to technology, Vlad asked, what about automatic computer-generated tutoring design by human tutors to scale their productivity? To rephrase it, does it cover computer-based tutoring courses developed by live tutors?
Yeah, so I think, and I want to be clear here, I think what Vlad is asking is really about asynchronous content, right? So as a great tutor, could I create a bunch of really cool content that any given student could then consume to be able to learn? Obviously, this is a little bit different from what we think of as relationship-based learning. I think the answer to that question is yes. And I think the answer to that question is this is probably an inevitable part of what we're going to have to put in place to be able to fulfill our promise as part of ARPA. But that being said, the evidence still is really, really strong that what kids need is they need relationships. They need someone to hold them accountable. They need an educator in a very small group or in a one-to-one situation at a regular pace throughout the year, most often, if possible, in the school time period. That is the most effective way. So as you know, the ARPA is not saying specifically, here's everything that defines what's evidence-based. They're saying it has to be evidence-based. And what they're looking for is the research to prove the effectiveness of the program. So it's really hard to kind of give an answer to that. I think the research points to this type of relationship, a personal one-on-one kind of relationship, whether it's video or in person. But I think the question to answer Vlad directly is yes, I think that asynchronous piece is going to have to be a part of it for scale.
So Paul asked a question that we did cover in during the presentation, but just also wanted to call it out in case there's something, any additional information or anything that you'd want to expand on. as a vendor, how can I connect with LEAs and bid on contracts in my area? So we said, register as a vendor on the website and connect with a school representative. Is there anything else that you would advise for those that are navigating the space here?
Yeah, I just want to be clear, that money is flowing from the state down into the districts, and those districts are local education agencies. The local education agencies then have the autonomy to put out their requests for bids or requests for proposals. So if you're sitting in a state and you're familiar with the districts, you want to register with each of the districts that you're interested in serving. And then they should be filtering those RFPs to you so that you can see if any of them are a good match and ones that you want to propose. The great thing about working with a company like Pearl is that there's going to be a bunch of data security and technical stuff that you need. So if you work with us and you're working on a proposal for an RFP and you need a bunch of technical jargon to kind of fill in the gaps on those RFPs as is required, we actually just supply all that stuff to you so you can meet all those requirements. Obviously, we want you to be our partner. So, we have some incentive to do that.
That's actually a great segue into a question that Arisha asked. How does the process look like once you sign up with Pearl?
So it depends on what size you are. So we have a 2-week free trial that you can sign up for. You can get in and start using our platform. You can add additional tutors and get other tutors teaching students over that 2 weeks. And over that 2-week period, we interact with you via email and give you tips. And obviously, if you need help, we can help you along the way. Once you're a paying customer with us, you have access to a wonderful team of people, and Araya being one of them, that will help you get trained up and everything and making sure that you're off and running. That allows you to self-subscribe up to 25 instructors. If you are larger than 25 instructors, you're one of our larger companies or you're in that process of emerging and becoming a larger company, and you're also looking to submit specifically to some of these RFPs, then we can help along the way as well. We get in and dig in a little deeper, and that's where, particularly if you're doing a lot of district work, we can really be what feels much more like a technical partner. Somebody said Mariah is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Love to get hyped up. So we are a little bit closer to the end of time, but I think we have a room for a couple more questions. So just want to let people know that. So the two questions that I will ask next, Nate, are a little bit more specific, which I think is great to see that some of you guys are really moving along in that process there. Lakinda asked, what should you do if you've been awarded a contract, but no further information has been provided because the contract was awarded on an as-needed basis?
So I would tell you, in that case, congratulations. You've been awarded a contract and you're kind of sitting there. I will tell you that sometimes the wheels of government move slowly, right? So money going from the federal government to the state government, going from the state government down to the LEAs, and then the LEAs and the bureaucracy, they're getting the money out, okay? So sometimes that is the case. So even though you haven't received money and things haven't rolled out, there may be some wheels of bureaucracy that are still turning. Be patient. Be patient, because this money is going to get spent. This money is probably going to get spent well before the 2024 cliff. And so if you're already in a good place to serve these students, I would be patient. That being said, there's no reason for you not to look for other opportunities at other districts. Some districts, as is also true at the state level, some states move faster than others. We're working with a state program right now that is incredibly progressive. So we're seeing things move a lot quicker, but they also have a lot of great people on staff helping to make that happen. So it just really depends. But again, congratulations. Diversify your sales and look at other opportunities, but definitely be patient, because it's probably not you, it's probably the wheels of bureaucracy.
Another specific question, with GovWin, where is the best place to focus, SLED or federal market?
I would look at the SLED. So I would be really focused on state, and I would be really focused on your state specifically. A lot of these programs are going to want to be, they're going to want to have some component of in-person tutoring. Now, that's not always the case, but if you can serve a district and you can show the district that you can actually serve them in person as well as online, that's really important.
Could you share what SLED is for everyone else who's not familiar with that?
I'm actually not sure. State Learning Education Department. I'm not, that's a tough one.
All right, that's one we'll Google on our end. Okay, so related to states, Kimberly asked, can you register with a district in another state?
State Law Enforcement Division. Thank you. Whoever Googled that or knew it, thank you. Go ahead, sorry, Naraya, can you ask that one again?
Yeah, so Kimberly asked, can you register with a district in another state?
My understanding is that you can. And the reason I say that is because we're seeing big tutoring companies that can act as subrecipients. We're seeing them win contracts in states that they currently don't exist in. So the answer to that question is yes. You also have certain situations, as I understand it. Also, there are certain states that are going to be much more in need than others. They may be low populated states, or they may be states with fewer number of teachers in regards to those ratios to students of need. You also have specific high density geographies that have a ton of students and sometimes a lot of students that are disadvantaged. And so ARPA really wants to pick those kids up that are disadvantaged. So you may have huge pockets in cities like New York, and Chicago, and Los Angeles that are going to need lots of supplement. State, local, and education.
Thanks, Michael.
I know there's probably 20 SLEDs.
Yeah. So the last question we'll address right now before we pass it off to Mate for your closing remarks is, do you have a sense for the demand for tutoring contracts for high schools compared to the elementary?
Can you say that one more time? I'm sorry, I lost you for a second.
Yeah. Do you have a sense of the demand for tutoring contracts for high schools compared to contracts to the elementary level?
Most of the contracts that you're going to be applying for, and when I say contracts, remember I'm talking about a vendor, because a vendor goes after contracts. Subrecipient goes after grants. Keep that in mind. But if you're looking to serve as a vendor and you're going after those contracts, most often those contracts will be at the district level, and that district will have some kind of comprehensive plan they're looking at for that specific district. That being said, as I mentioned before, there will be a large focus on early learners, so early literacy. To give you an example, there are second graders this year who started as second graders this year who never in their life entered into a school, right? Because they lost 2 years of being in person. So we've got second grade teachers who aren't trained to teach someone who doesn't have any sense as to how to open a book that you read left to right, any of that stuff. Having to teach those kids how to read, how to think about what a book is in the first place. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around, but it is truly the case. So that early literacy and reading, math are going to be really, really important. And all of that should be kind of pretty clearly defined and made specific in the RFP.
Well, thanks for that. And it looks like Michael's jumped in there and is addressing some other questions. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Nate, to share your last remarks in closing today's webinar.
I think first and foremost, I want to remind everyone that attended today that we will be doing more webinars and bringing on some amazing guest expert speakers. We've got some folks that we're talking to openly about coming in and speaking. It won't always be me. We've got people that really know their stuff across a variety of different subjects that are important to this particular initiative. Also, we plan to make notes, videos, and transcripts related to today's webinar available to all of you. if you are already planning to participate as a subrecipient or vendor and are looking for a technical partner, an all-in-one platform to implement your program, please schedule a time to chat with me via the link posted in this chat. This link, if you miss it, will also be sent out to everyone via email following up the webinar. I want to thank you so much for your time. I know that we got deep into the weeds today, but I just appreciate all of you and appreciate the fact that you're taking the time to really learn how you can help. There's such a need. So thank you again, and please reach out if you have any additional questions.
Michael will be sharing your link for if in case people are interested in meeting with you to talk about. Nate, you still there?
Yes, I'm here, sorry.
Yeah, so Nate, Michael is sharing your meeting link to schedule. So if folks want to meet with you to learn more about Pearl, could you share some information about like what meeting with you, what help you can provide?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously we're looking for folks that are, ready to roll out programs that are actively either already responding to RFPs or in the process of submitting, or have been awarded and are looking for a technical partner. We're looking to build relationships with people that really want the technical infrastructure to be successful in these programs. So the link that I put out there is access to my calendar for a 15-minute chat. And obviously that's just 15 minutes to just get to know one another. And if there's an opportunity there and it looks like there's a path forward, then of course we can get into more robust conversations. But we are a software company, but we also really want to be thought leaders in this space. So we more than anything want to make sure that everyone's aware that we're here for you.
Thank you. As a reminder, everybody who's registered, you'll be receiving a recording to this as well as other resources, and we'll keep you in our listserv for any upcoming webinars. If you receive emails from us and you're like, hey, I got what I need and I don't need any more communications from you guys, just email us and let us know and we'll take you off the list. So again, thank you for all being here. Really excited to continue doing work here.
All right, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.